their work, please. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the press conference corresponding to the French production Eden, which has just been projected in the official section. It is the fourth feature film of the director, and on this occasion also co-script writer Mia Hansen-Løf, who is here with us, along with the cast of the actors, with Félix de Gevry, Romain Kolinka, Vincent Lacoste, Alon Soulay, and Hugo Konzelman. Okay, if you deem pertinent, we will start with the questions. Hi, good afternoon. A couple of questions for the director. First of all, I would like to know whether all of the songs are of artists who exist, or whether there's original music scores in the film. And I would like you to talk about how do you consider the evolution of the music that we listen to in the film. We see it in the film itself, but I would like to hear it from you, okay? Oui. Oui.
Ouais, c'est au numéro...
Ou il faut que je réponde en anglais?
Non, français.
Non, vous l'avez en français aussi.
Oui, oui.
Numéro 4.
Ok, je vais répondre en français.
Oui.
Les morceaux sont tous originaux.
The fragments are all original. They are all fragments of music which already existed, apart from three pieces of music, one composed by my brother, along with his collaborator, another song by Craig Grottier, who is and the other one by Thierry, and a fourth by Thierry Chanleur. But apart from these tracks, they were tracks made in the garage style of that time, which reproduces the sound and the spirit of the tracks that were made at that composed at that time. But those, apart from those three, they all pre-existed. As regards to the evolution of music, what I can say is that the election or the choice of those tracks embraces the movement and of the film, and it's chronological. We see how the music evolves as time goes by, and it evolved in a very relative way, because garage music is a music which has not evolved too much, and that's one of the reasons for which, to a certain extent, it got out of fashion, and then all of a sudden it comes back as a cycle. But it's a music that hasn't evolved too much and has not changed too much vis-a-vis its where it originated from. And to a certain extent, the artists, we see that there is a change. And the change is can see with the Daft Punk. The Daft Punk do change, and what they do at the end has nothing to do with what we heard of their music at the beginning of the film. Hi, good afternoon. My question is for the director and for Felix, the main actor. I would like to know, and I'm interested in knowing, why you decided that the physical transformation of Felix is almost non-existent over those 15 years. Is that a metaphor of his little evolution personally, of him being anchored back in time? It doesn't enable him to leave the situation that he sees himself involved in. And I think that's very interesting, because it's a decision which is quite interesting. We see that there aren't any physical changes in him throughout that 15-year period. Thank you. On the one hand, the fact that concept of the actors aging in films such as this, I think that's quite delicate, that issue of aging. Sometimes you adopt a solution, but I don't like it very much, and that is to use the special effects, which are too evident or too obvious, to put grey hairs or to add different things to their face. But I don't like that, because instead of coming closer to the truthness of the passing of time, quite often it achieves all the contrary, because it reminds me that I'm in the cinema and not in real life. So therefore, I don't usually use that. I never recur to effects. I use much more subtle things. And in the case of Felix, it is true. It's so subtle that you haven't noticed it. But it does change a little bit it is quite clear that it's less noticeable than Pauline Etienne, who in the character of Pauline Etienne, at the end she does have a face, he's a bit fatter, he's got a beard, he's changed his style of clothing, but I didn't want to do any more because if I had to add things to his face, it wouldn't have been convincing. Another solution would have been, just like Richard Clayton said, to wait 20 years in order but I don't have the economic means, neither the patience to do so. I've also got a beard problem, and my beard doesn't grow. Well, my beard doesn't grow, or it didn't grow back then, but at least during the shooting of the film. I'm not bothered that we see that he doesn't get older or time doesn't go by, because in the film what we talk about is that suffering, the suffering or the inability to become an adult, to reach adult age, and it's inspired upon my brother, the film, and that's what happened to him. And quite often the people used to say to him, you don't change, you're always as young as always. And he thought that it was going to, like, you know what, he wanted to just become an adult, and he was really bothered when people made those remarks to him. My question is for all of you. I would like to know whether you were familiarized with the world of electronic music before this film, or whether this was absolutely new to all of you. I personally was. Well, I think all of us knew what it was because it's the music of our generation. Perhaps not in this intimate way, perhaps we didn't know it that closely or that close up. We did know, we did have the CDs, but we didn't know how it was played at that period, in that time. We weren't so strongly impregnated by that music. I think that we belong to a generation which has inherited that music, and now we live in a world in which electronic music is all over the place. Such was not the case in the early 1990s, and we don't have the same conviction as these people had at that time with that style, which was completely new. But I knew about it before, yes, before shooting the film. This film has enabled us also to discover this style of music and this specific current of music, electronic music and garage music. For us, or at least for me, it has been a great discovery. Yes, it has, because we've had time to be able to study it in depth and to get to know it better. For me, it's been a true discovery. Well, the truth is, I didn't know it too well. I knew who Daft Punk was, as everyone does. I knew who Daft Punk was. Yes, of course. He plays himself. But in the scenes when they mix music, it's Mia's brother Sven who has showed us, well, he showed us, I'm not too sure that I'll be able to do a live mix now, but in any case, he showed us a little bit how to learn to use a turntable and a mixing table and to use vinyl records. With the film, we've been able to discover further in depth this very rich movement of music with so many different artists, which were very interesting. Yes, because to mix with vinyl records, this is not done so much nowadays. And when we started the film, Sven, my brother, took time to help the actors to learn how to do mix songs and blend songs, to learn to mix and blend songs, albeit to be able to do it at least during the film. So therefore I was aware of to what extent this is a period which has been left in the past. Obviously things come back in different cycles. DJs now don't mix with vinyl records. They don't do it that way. Now the practice of mixing music is very different. Well, they practically don't do anything. Why? Because they they use computers, and plus they make much more money than they did in the past. Yes. Hi. I would like to know to what extent this film is the dark side of the history of Daft Punk. Daft Punk is a group that muted, and the protagonist is there, and we can understand it as the dark side of Daft Punk is sort of like a clip in the ear to Daft Punk, because nobody knows who Daft Punk is in European music, but in the film we also see that nobody really knows who Daft Punk is, really, if you catch what I'm saying. We don't know who they were
Pour moi,
physically.
le fait qu'il soit rejeté
Okay.
à la porte de discothèque,
For me, the fact
ne
that
reflète pas le fait que,
2 times in the film they get thrown out of the queue waiting to go into a discotheque. This doesn't mean that there's a dark side, and no, not at all, in their trajectory. But we simply just wanted to talk about how their notoriety in a very malicious way, but it was quite direct. I could have addressed things and show them as robots or show their success in the newspapers and the success of Daft Punk. It would have been much more fun, perhaps. No, I thought much more fun showing,
ils ont créé ces robots,
as I've shown it, to create.
entreprise de n'exister qu'à travers leur personnage de robot.
Well,
Du coup, ils peuvent se faire
they
reconnaître,
simply existed through those robot characters, and that's how they could get into a queue and not be recognized. Paul, all the contrary, his trajectory is not the same as Daft Punk's. He didn't achieve the same success, but he, on the contrary, can walk into any club. So therefore, the fact that they get thrown out of a queue in the entrance to a club, I didn't want to show anything at all, no dark side to it, but we can say that the darker side of the film,
de faire voir l'autre côté, le B-side.
or what I'm trying to show you, is the B-side. The B-side. Someone was saying that I wanted to show the B-side of this world and that music. That's simply all. Yes. Yeah, yes, we can hear you. I would like to ask you, before Felix had mentioned, well, this is the music of his generation, so therefore I don't know to what extent we can say that this is a generational film. Not too sure whether anyone, Mia or anyone, can answer me, or any of them. I'm not too sure whether you see this film on this generational value to it.
Moi, c'est une chose à laquelle je crois beaucoup et à laquelle j'ai cru depuis le début.
Well, this is something that I have believed in from the beginning, from the outset, yes, to a certain extent. Well, we will see later what happens with the film, but I've always believed that in this film we were telling a story that was inspired upon the life of my brother. And if we were successful, and if we managed for it to be a universal story, well, I think we were telling the story of an entire generation, albeit we didn't want to tell what the French touch was about, or the French house movement. It is, however, quite clear that it doesn't render any accounts to everything in the French Touch generation, but we wanted to talk about the singular destination of one of those people who was a little bit outside, or considered himself an outsider of that movement, someone who didn't have an enormous amount of success, to tell through the destination of this person, or to tell them talk about their aspirations, their ideals, and the energy and also the modernity of an entire generation which is my generation. I believe that many young people, and that was the case of Felix, we've talked about this, they feel that they are the inheritors, they are the heirs of this story. I think it's also a generational film for the generation of that, and also for the generation of 1980s. Talking to Sven and his friends, they found those sensations of those rave parties and so many details of that period. But I think it's also a generation for all generations, because if we made a portrait, I'm sure that would, even now, many of the elements that we see in the film with my friends nowadays are reproduced again, have been repeated. There are a lot of links to this, and I think it's better to deal with it that way than more in a didactic manner to just focus upon big events. I think there's an intimate look back to the film which shows that it's quite real. It's not that we're looking for that truthfulness, but it seems that for me, I think it is a very special movie in that respect. Congratulations for the film. I wanted just a gesture for the piece of information for the director, which I thought was surprising. Why doesn't in the film the moment in which the Cheers, the duo disappears or breaks up, or whether there's any special reason that that moment of the story doesn't emerge in the film? Thank you.
Parce qu'il n'a pas disparu en fait.
No, they don't disappear. Cheers doesn't disappear. It continues to exist, and plus we're going to hold a Cheers party when the film comes out in France.
Quelque chose que j'ai fait dans le
It's
film,
premiered in France. And something that I did do in the film and can be claimed to me, I think that life is very subtle and full of nuances, and in the film sometimes we tend to simplify things so that everything can be much more accessible. And I usually have the trend to think that those nuances can be transmitted, that we have to keep them and maintain them, and that's something that it can contribute to cinema, a uniqueness to cinema, because there are many films that renounce using those types of nuances, and I think that we have to keep them and maintain them, but other people prefer to tell stories through archetypes. But I have always preferred, from my first film, to believe that we can transmit emotions and deep feelings and universal feelings through these nuances. And if I say this because perhaps I could have been much more spectacular or much more intense or powerful to show the moment in which Cheers comes to an end. But the fall of that character is very sweet and very soft, and the most tragic thing about that fall is that he's someone that all of a sudden he sees that he's fallen, but the fall is quite progressive. It's not all of a sudden.
¿No hay más preguntas?
No further questions?
Bonjour, je suis la seule journaliste française ici, je travaille pour Chronicart.
I'm the only French journalist, I think, who's here today, and I would like to know
Travailler le scénario et la...
how you've worked upon the script and the screenplay in order to include all of the music and soundtrack to the film, because this is a film talks an art, the art of music, the art of garage and electronic music. When you decide to make a film upon this type of art, such as this, how is that done? How do you incorporate all of that music within the film? It's difficult to answer this in a few words, because that was the objective, along with my brother, to try to manage to achieve that, to make sure that the music formed part of the music is the heart and soul. It's the main plot of the film. When we're looking for an answer, we said the music is the big star here, and we had to incorporate that, include it in the film. It has been permanently, when we reflected upon this when we were preparing the film. To give you an example, because otherwise it would be too long. For example, as regards when we treated all of the sound in the film, at all times we made sure that the music, that we would be able to hear it just like you hear it at that time in the clubs, sometimes with that a bit deafening type sound, a sound which is not too pure or clean, but at the same time it were accessible to whoever's hearing, because if it had been too realistic, perhaps it wouldn't have been accessible to listen to. So therefore we wanted to try find a middle point when transmitting the music, and in turn making sure that music can be alive and quite specific and noticeable, and that interest and desire that the music can form part of the scenes, because there's music at all times throughout the entire film. So therefore the music is based upon music which comes from a mixing table, but we had to reinvent it, and constantly we wanted to make sure that it was a very alive music, for it to evolve, and not only simply something which was external or from the outside, which sometimes happens in other films. We didn't want that to be the case in our film. Hi, I would like to know where part of your generation, the fact that that person is unable to make ends meet. Yes, I do think it forms part of my generation, but not as much of the generation of the actors in the film. For me, there's a difference or a contrast between the generation of my brother, who's 40 years, or mine, or people who are between 30 and 40 years of age. At least that is what I've seen around me. Yes, it was very difficult to turn ourselves into adults, and the Felix's generation and the actors, on the other hand, the cast, that is to say, these are people that are much more responsible. They're more concerned about knowing how to make a living. So therefore I do believe that times have changed. And before, at that time, there was a much more relaxed attitude, which I think has changed. And the young people nowadays they continue to enjoy themselves and have fun, but I don't think they have the same relationship, which is very sort of like uninterested, or they're not, or unconcerned. They don't have the same attitude, almost naive or hedonism that appears in the film. Nowadays, I think things have changed. I would like to also ask you whether you've borne in mind as references some of the films that have been made, or music films, that is to say, of showing a generation of music, but in a specific moment in the story, for example, of a certain city in a certain territory, a certain city which is linked to music. Like, for example, I'm thinking of 24 Hours, Party People by Winterbottom, but there's a very long list. There are many, many films that use music in order to reflect a certain period and a certain place in time. This feature film have helped them. They were taken as a reference. I was wondering whether that was the case with your film. Well, quite obviously, yes, we have addressed that possibility, yes, as regards to how we treated the music and how we filmed the clubs or the discos. In many other films, for example, we believed that that's a very delicate issue to how to deal with it. But for us, it was very interesting. That is to say, I've seen a lot of films, and we've seen things that are well known, and also documentaries I have seen. But what surprised my brother and I, but also we thought, which was also quite stimulating and exciting, that apart from the fact whether we liked it or not, we didn't have the impression that we have seen films in which the treatment of music corresponded to what we wanted to do. We were interested in to maintain a certain realism in the music within which to find poetry, to make it poetic, not realism per se, but the poetry that may exist within realism. That's what we were interested in. And that realism, we didn't perceive it in the films that we had seen beforehand. We also wanted to make a film that wasn't a club or a discotheque type film. We wanted to talk about a group of young people and a generation of youngsters, but we didn't want that in the same time the film becomes so, we wanted to be as genuine as possible when representing nightlife world, but to leave all of the genre cliches of a film of discotheque. 24-Hour Party People was one of our references, but we've not tried to imitate it. It's a film that has nothing to do with Eden, but it is that 24 Hours Party People is a film that we like, that we've analyzed to know what we were interested in that film. Another film, which could be a reference in a bit more intimately, and which is much more closely linked to cinema, Minimum Mambo, which is a film that I like very much, and I think that film talks about melancholy and poetry of that time, albeit it takes place in a place which is very far away, and it doesn't take place in the same place or the environment or the surroundings where mine does, but it has a certain level of impressionism when reflecting the world of nightlife, the nightlife world, better said. Hi, good afternoon. Above all, congratulations for the film. Personally, I thought it was a fun film apart from the script and the plot behind it. I would like to ask the director a personal issue. I saw a poster at the beginning of the film of, yes, it's going to be all right, of Lady Jade. I'm not too sure whether that's an issue of the art director or whether it was a question of the contextualize that period of time, or whether that was just, what was the idea behind that? Genesis Be Alright and Lady J. Well, I've got to go and see it again. No, I didn't pick up on that. I'm not too sure whether it appears. The art director perhaps was contextualizing the period of time or every year, because at each time it's all very, very correct all on the posters. Yes, in general, we've tried to be very rigorous. In each poster, well, we had to get to know, and also because of rights, copyright, it's surprising that it talk about what scene was that in? At the beginning, in one of the scenes in an apartment or in a club, where was it? At the entrance in one of the discotheques, at about in the first 15 minutes of the film. Well, I'll check. I'll have to see the film again. And it appears several times, and that's why it surprised me, because perhaps it was some sort of,
C'est poster de quoi?
you did it, or some sort of tribute that you were making there by using those posters.
Pourquoi? Je suis désolée, j'ai pas compris.
Well, it's a poster, yes, the poster. The poster appears at the entrance of a discotheque, and it's repeated at the entrance to the corridor, at the entrance to the, I'll look at it on the internet, I'll show it to you, okay?
Il y a un peu, moi celui, il y a un poster qu'on voit beaucoup à un moment.
There's a poster that's seen quite a lot, which is that of Soirée Respect. Soirée Respect.
De l'époque, quoi. On a utilisé
I
pratiquement.
think all of those posters are dated back to that period, so we've exclusively used posters of that time, and sometimes we've recreated them, but I think that 95% of the posters that appear in the film are real posters of Soirée Respect or Nights of Respect and Cheers.
Vite avec un poster de
I'm very interested in what you're saying, but I'm not too sure whether you've mistaken it with some of the posters of Respect or Cheers. No, I'll check it on the internet and I'll show it to you, and I'll tell it to you if that's okay. Hi, good afternoon. Congratulations for the film. And I would like to ask, because what I especially liked, and leaving the issue of the music per se, the personal relations of the leading actor and his love relationships, how that's developed in a very natural manner. And I like that part very much, in a type of lost illusions or lost dreams for when you're 20, and how slowly but surely all your illusions fall apart and collapse. And that issue of these relations, what surprised me in the actress, I don't know what her name is, it's not his girlfriend, but ends up being his girlfriend, and at the end he's a friend who's got the two children, and they see each other in Osagor. I like that actress very much, and I would like you to tell us something about how you worked with her and how you've integrated that personal side of Paul's story, the leading actor, in the script that goes over that period of time throughout the storyline of the development of garage music. Thank you.
Pour moi, depuis le départ, il y avait cette idée d'un parallèle.
For me, from the outset, there was the idea of making a parallelism between
Paul, pour la musique,
the constant of Paul's love, his fidelity to almost self-destructive to music, because world changes, as someone in a club says, and he doesn't. It's the idea of a love that doesn't change, that doesn't evolve.
parallèlement à ça,
And that's his fidelity. On the other hand, parallel to this, I wanted to show that round of girls and girlfriends who go through his life,
s'attacher parce que la vie,
and that he doesn't manage to retain, because the life of a DJ, well, as you know, makes these meetings very easy, but it doesn't facilitate, make it easy to have a family life. But there was one that came back, yes,
la femme de sa vie,
who was more recurrent, perhaps the woman of his life, or should have been the woman of his life, or the love of his life, but it didn't work with him. But for she's different to the others. The others just appear for one at a specific moment. There are episodes in his life, but she's the one that comes back. She reappears, but it never works with her from the outset. From the outset, they fight a lot every time they see each other. She's a character which is a very important character for me. And as regards to Pauline Etienne, that's the name of the actress, she's an actress that, quote-unquote, I had already identified for that part. It's not a choice that I did exactly with the actors when choosing the actors. I chose them differently. To Pauline, I'd already seen her in different films. She had worked quite a lot in France, and I felt like shooting a film with her. I think she's very genuine. She has a purity and simplicity, and also something quite modern, which I think is very interesting for the character of Louise. Louise, who is a very deep character, and very different to the rest of the characters in the film. Hi. Congratulations for the film, first of all. I would like to say the following. You talk about 24-hour party people, and I see that your film, Eden, is much more sensitive, similar to a film that which is The Last Days of Disco of Will Stillman. I'm not too sure whether you've seen it. And so, because with The Last Days of Disco, the same thing happened to me as what happened with your film, because you end up with a feeling of a mixture, a perfect mixture of euphoria and melancholy, which are the terms that you referred to at the beginning, with a song by M. Capella that talks about these two feelings that are very balanced. I would like to know whether you were seeking to achieve this in your film, that the feeling in the audience could be that duality, the mixture of melancholy or nostalgia and euphoria. Thank you.
Oui, je crois que c'est vraiment. Oui, recherché, je sais pas, mais en tout cas,
Well, I don't know whether I was looking for it, but in any case, I was aware of the fact that's what I wanted to obtain, just like in the other films. In this one, a bit more extreme, because the euphoria is in the heart and soul of the film. There's an energy, a special energy, and that duality between something which is very enlightened and very dark is something that I always reproduce in my films. And it's even the driving force of my film and my films and inspiration. There's something that I like, and I like it, but I've not seen it again. But it is a film which was also very important. When I saw it, I saw that there was a sensitivity, a universe there, a way of portraying the characters in a special way, and also a certain sadness and sorrow, and that I understood quite well, and also with that formidable actress Célie Dimi, who we saw in Kids a bit earlier. And in Kids, albeit it's a world which is very distant to ours, Kids was a film for my generation. For my generation, it was a very important film. Congratulations for the film, and I thought it's quite funny. You talked to showgirls, and it was quite funny. What's the reason of including showgirls? Because not too many references to that film are usually made. It's incredible, because it's being very important. All of a sudden, it was just a light idea, but all of a sudden, it's becoming over the top. A friend of ours, my brother and I, a friend, he's obsessed with that film. Over years and years, he talked about the film, and also Showgirls. At the Pont de Paradis, everybody talked about it. He always talks about the film, and he invited girls, and he talked to the girl, his girlfriends, about Showgirls. So we couldn't resist not including it there. That scene had another objective. The idea was to talk about Cyril and the complicity of the times they spent together and the time they lose when they're together. The idea was to talk about something else, but at the end, the idea of introducing Showgirls was something that we had to introduce and place there. We had talked so much about it, and that's why we had to introduce it and use it there. But it does talk about the relationship that this group of people have with culture, the American culture, a cinephilia almost, where the American cinema is very important for all of them. And this also links to how they connect to music, because if we talk about the French touch, as if they'd invented this music, but the French DJs went to the underground, to Chicago and New York, and they were the ones that brought to Paris this type of music. And they created that sort of French house music. And at that time, it was liked very much, this type of music, to the outsiders, but it's quite clear that they liked the American culture a lot very much as well. I would like to ask, what influence does Daft Punk had in the script? Whether you knew, did you have their approval before writing the script, or could one of the actors help you with them? And then once seeing the result, whether they like the image of them as they're the current representatives of the genre of music, and also the drugs that appear all the time, albeit and they're not affected in the film as regards drugs. These two questions are quite different. The Daft Punk, they read the script immediately, that is to say, as soon as I wrote it. My brother knew them very well. They weren't too much in contact, but they did form part of, well, obviously they knew each other from the beginning of the 1990s, And so therefore it was very important for my brother to be able to have their consent, not only that we needed it because we needed their approval, but at least symbolically for my brother it was very important to think that the Daft Punk would understand the film and the project because they were going to play a very important role in this story at the end of the day. So yes, they read the script and they were very, very kind. They were a lot of solidarity. They gave us a hand. They didn't help us financially, but they encouraged us and they had trust in ourselves, in a moment which was very important because it was very difficult to make this film. They helped us to achieve the rights of their tracks for very little music and for very little money, and that was very important when financing the film. The film was a tribute to garage music, but everyone gave a symbolic price. We didn't have to pay too much money vis-a-vis the soundtrack and the rights. We were able to achieve all the tracks we wanted and without paying too much money for them. And one of them has seen the film and I think he liked it very much, and the other member of Daft Punk hasn't seen the film yet. So, and as regards to drugs throughout the film, here we see how they snort cocaine. When we financed the film, the French center that provides public money obviously didn't give me that public money from the French government, and this is something that they reproached, and they said that we didn't deal with the drugs in a sufficiently violent way, not having demonstrated it in another way, and I didn't want to sweeten it or to make it much more violent than what it is. They told me, they complained that you see people that consume drugs, but you don't see OD'd or violent scenes vis-a-vis drugs. That's what they said to me. Well, why? Well, because simply what I've tried to is to talk about the place that drugs have taken in the life of my brother and to show them just like that way, no more, no less. It is something that forms part of their day-to-day life. Yes, it forms part of your day-to-day life. It's quite clear that it becomes a bit destructive, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have to go to the hospital. But quite often we see people having a good time, it's great, or you see them, and sometimes both things at the same time, it kills them. And the characters have to suffer a punishment because of taking drugs. In my case, is not the case, but I do talk about the dependency upon drugs and the suffering that's linked to drugs. For me, it's been a very pleasant surprise to see Greta Gerwig. She is very charming and a great talent, and she shows her how charming she is in those 2 or 3 sequences that she appears. And she's the scriptwriter, whether she influenced the construction of her character that she portrays. Thank you. Well, we've worked quite well together. I like this actress very much. I saw her in Greenberg and in Stillman's films and Francis A. And my brother also. We've always been fans of hers, and even great fans of hers. And that is to say, we feel almost in a certain way identified to her. But when I wrote the script, I wasn't thinking about her. In fact, she plays a very small role. And the truth is, when I started to look for an actress, I said, well, why not go and see her? Why not try it, even if it's a small role? Perhaps she may want to play it. And that was the case. She liked my films as well, she said at that time. She's a person who's very generous, and she said, well, okay, she'd be glad to. Then she couldn't say much more, but it's quite clear that we worked very well. No probs. She participated in the film. She was quite available. But the truth is, it was quite brief and almost frustrating because it was that brief. Okay, no further questions, and that's the end of the press conference. Thank you very much to all of you.